This episode is sponsored by the Hollywood Casino at Charlestown Races in West Virginia. Featured entertainment includes David Lucas and Hans Kim on the 26th. Details and tickets at HollywoodCasinoCharlestown.com. Plus, enjoy complimentary beverages when playing with your Penn Play card. Visit the Penn Play Center to sign up. Must be 21 to enter the casino floor and attend a show. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Welcome to the newest episode of Beyond the Fame with Jason Fraley. I'm your host, Jason Fraley, picking the brains of the top filmmakers, musicians, and artists of our time. Grammy-nominated metalcore band As I Lay Dying rocks the Fillmore in Silver Spring, Maryland this Friday night. I spoke with frontman Tim Lambesis about the band's evolution across all of their albums, as well as his own personal journey seeking redemption and a second chance. Hey, Tim Lambesis. Hey, thanks so much for joining us on WTOP in Washington, D.C.
Hey, thanks for having me.
We're talking because your metal band, As I Lay Dying, is coming to the Fillmore in Silver Spring on Friday, July 26th. Hey, thanks for doing this.
Yeah, I'm glad to be coming on the 26th. I'm glad to be here on the air.
Absolutely, absolutely. So have you all played the Fillmore? Obviously, there's a bunch of around the country, but have you ever played the Silver Spring one a lot, or would this be your first time rocking our faces off here?
You know, I'm somewhat of a stereotypical musician in that I have a hazy memory, but I think we have played there a long time ago. This would be our second time, I believe, but I could be mixing up Fillmores because just like you mentioned, there's a few of them across the country.
Yeah, Fillmore West, I believe, is rather famous. But
Yeah.
But anyway, but yeah, how about just generally here in the DC area? Does the nation's capital, like, remind our listeners here, obviously we're known for like go-go and stuff like that in DC proper, but is there a good contingent of metal fans here? I mean, I personally think there are, but what's your take on every time you swing through?
Yeah, I mean, we've had some incredible shows in the DC area, Maryland. I mean, we always look forward to it because us being from the West Coast, our first time there, we thought, nobody's going to care. And when we got there, we felt the love. And so now we always look forward to coming back.
Fantastic. Tease this real quick. I don't want to burn the whole set list and spoil the whole thing, but it does make for a good radio soundbite if you rattle off a couple of the big hits that your fans are going to hear. So what can we promise them that, the bangers that you can't, they'll run you off the stage if you don't play, as well as, maybe some deep cuts you might mix in too.
Yeah, I mean, we all live in an era where fans are pretty well aware of what their top tens are, and so we generally will start with our top 10 and then we'll add what's missing, so like we try to represent at least 2 or 3 songs from each album, and in our case we're playing a new song on this tour because we're beginning the rollout for a new album at the end of this year, so we're starting to get a little momentum going in that direction. I personally love playing the new song Burden. It's like a breath of fresh air for me to have a new era of the band and to be working towards a new goal.
Awesome. Well, you just I gotta follow up on what you just teased. The new album's coming out later this year. So the song you said's Burden, so we might hear that if we turn out to the show. But do you know what the album's called yet, or is that TBD?
Well, that part is TBD, and we're very close. I mean, we're probably like a couple weeks away from being able to announce. So I wish I could say right now, but all I can promise is that it will be out before the end of this year. If I had to make my absolute best guess, the full album would be out sometime closer to November with a handful of singles coming out throughout the year up until that point.
Awesome. Well, when you hear that, metalcore fans, get ready. Stay tuned for that album about to drop and come out to the show in Silver Spring for a preview of some of the songs like Burden. Awesome. Well, whenever I have, a famous artist like yourself on, I always love to paint sort of your origin story as well. I know you're born in 1980 out in San Diego, California. So you're the year of, what is that? The Shining and Raging Bull and Caddyshack and Ordinary People. There you go. Good year. But
yeah.
But music wise, what all did you grow up on? I'm trying to. So if you were 80, then gosh, I guess Metallica, you probably would have grown up with that. Or what were some of the other big metal or music in any genre really that you grew up on?
Yeah, so it's like before the era of being able to discover bands on the internet. I would hear metal bands on the radio like Metallica. I remember the heaviest band I ever heard on the radio was Pantera, and then that would, as a kid, you'd either sneak off to the record store so you could buy a metal record, because parents at that time were pretty, frowned upon metal, especially the album artwork and stuff like that, and so you had to try to sneak off to the record store and buy a metal record without, without your parents knowing about it. And it was this funny era where you just went and you picked up an album, looked at the cover, and you thought, like, does this look like what I want it to sound like, and so you had bands like Iron Maiden that had their Eddie on the cover, and Megadeth had their character Vic, and so I would pick up records like that because I thought, like, these are really intense metal looking characters, and so some of those records, to be totally honest, like when I first bought Iron Maiden at the time, I thought they were going to be way heavier because the album cover looked like it was going to be death metal or something. You know what I mean? And I appreciate them now, but as a kid, I remember thinking, like, oh, this is not nearly as heavy as the album cover leads me to believe it might be.
Don't judge a book or an album by its cover, but it's all right.
Yeah.
But so you love the music. Did you like wear the t-shirts to school and everything?
I actually ended up going to a high school that had uniforms, so I was
Whoa,
not
okay.
able to. Yeah, it was colored, like these like golf shirts we had to wear. We had like three colors we could choose from, and that was the extent of my choices back then. But I still love the music. I also grew up on some punk, being from California. I mean, California has such strong punk roots, and I think that some of that thrash metal and punk crossover is like energy that I put into our music, even if we don't necessarily sound like a punk band. Some of that energy made its way into our music.
Wow, okay. So yeah, Santa Fe Christian School in Solana Beach, California. I guess that was the where you had to wear the uniform.
Yeah. And I mean, there's a lot of metalheads there. There's a funny uh, fun fact in the yearbook of my senior year. Yearbooks tend to like list things like most popular bands that year, and so they had people in the school put a vote as like what their favorite band was that year, and the yearbook, I think that number one or number two was actually Fear Factory, oddly enough.
Wow. All right. All right. So then the band itself, As I Lay Dying, forms in what, 2000, 2000. How do you meet the that initial lineup there?
So in 2000, it was actually I had written music by myself with actually an incredible guitar player friend of mine that had taught me a few things on guitar growing up. Him and I had written songs together for what would become the first As I Lay Dying record. While he wasn't in As I Lay Dying, it was like kind of the origin was. So I kind of say that the origin of what became As I Lay Dying was the songs that I wrote in 2000, and then in 2001, that was when I finally put together like a live lineup, and we went and performed those songs. And that was a friend of mine from high school, and then at the time we didn't know any better drummers than Jordan Mancino, so we had reached out to him and asked him to join it. And he had come and gone a few times along that year, like where he was committed and then quit, and then committed again and then quit, and obviously over a long period of time, it all stuck, or at least for a very long time. But that's the origin of the band.
Nice. How did the name stick? Were you all like sitting around one day? Like, do you remember the actual moment where it was like As I Lay Dying?
Well, we had been tossing around different name ideas for a long time, and we couldn't find anything. And that was the first one that got submitted. It was actually our guitar player at the time. He was going to college, and he had some literature assignment for his English class, and he looked on the back. I don't know if you remember those things called Cliff's Notes. They were like those like book summaries. They were
Of
like those
course,
yellow.
but I never
Yeah.
used them. I read the whole book.
Of course, yeah. We all say that, right? And
Actually, I kind of did for most of my thing, but I know what you mean.
yeah. Well, it depends on how good you and how much you've been procrastinating. So sometimes you just had to read that. You had to test last minute or whatever. And he looked at the back and he said, this phrase came out. I've never read the book. I don't think the band should be like tied into the book per se, but this is a really cool title, and it was like very clear, like front runner, and we during that little short, I guess we'll say like 1 month period of time where we were searching for band names, we never had anything surpass that, and so we went with it. And of course, we naturally got questions about if the band was inspired by the book, and I have to be honest, it was inspired by the cliff notes of the book.
So we're talking about William Faulkner's "As I Lay Dying" is the book, but you're saying
Yes.
the Cliff Notes book. All right, as I lay procrastinating.
Exactly. Yeah.
What you should have called it.
Yeah.
Awesome, awesome. All right, well then, of course, then the band's off and running. Tell me memories of the putting together the first one, Beneath the Encasing of Ashes. What can you even look back on it now, or after you've evolved so much, or like, are you still proud of it all these years later?
Well, I mean, I'm proud of it because it's like foundationally, what got the band started. And sometimes people talk about doing music forever and then they never actually do it. And I think that anything that just really gets the gears in motion and then gives you a chance to progress. And so for that reason, I'm proud of it. I would also say as a guitar player, I had only been playing guitar for about a year and a half when I wrote all that material. So it's very simple in that regard, and you can see my progression as a guitar player as I wrote songs on Frailwords Collapse and albums that followed that, and then naturally Phil, our guitar player, who is much more advanced than I am, when he started writing, the band really had a lot of room to expand. So I think it's an important part of our history, and the funny thing about that is I had written those songs so close to the actual recording date that our drummer at the time was actually I was like air drumming the parts like that, teaching him in the studio like moments before he was recording them.
Oh, so it was that last minute.
Yeah, yeah,
Procrastinating again.
yep. That, but I had booked this, and back then it was different time, and there wasn't home production like people have now, and so I had booked the studio time, and I had written an EP, and then we went in to do the, and I was like, you know what, guys, I think I got enough to do a full length, and started teaching him the remaining, four or so songs, and so it wasn't, I guess it's partly procrastination, but partly just at that ambition of converting an EP into a full length last minute.
Right, right. Exactly, exactly. Well, I want to catch everybody up, like, since we're moving chronologically. I mean, I know An Ocean Between Us is like, I think when tons of people start noticing you, but what about like sort of that period right before you got to that point? You mentioned Frailwords Collapse in 2003, Shadows Are Security in '05. Like, talk about that pre-Oceans Before Us period. Like, how do you think you guys are sort of evolving and getting better and better? You were racking up Artist of the Year in San Diego Music Awards. I think it's a fascinating little period there, before the huge blowing up of the band. How are you evolving in that pre-period?
Yeah, so the band started out with well, I will never try to take credit for every last little note written. I was the primary songwriter on guitar in the early days, and the band naturally evolved when Phil joined the band. And so Frailwords Collapse as an example, you have an album with very talented guitar player, but not the primary songwriter. So you have the guitars are written by the singer, performed by a guitar player, and then that's Frailwords Collapse. And then when Shadows of Security came around, it was the first time Phil and I had a chance to collaborate, and we co-wrote that album together. And of course, he executed all the guitar parts for the recording. And then Ocean Between Us, like you mentioned, is a really monumental point where it was kind of like we had the formula figured out of like how him and I exchange ideas. He had really actually taken the reins and taken a lot of ownership of that role and just really pushed it to like new territory. And I think that was a really refining moment for us.
Absolutely. And let's do a deep dive on Nothing Left off that album, because that's one, I'd say one of your more famous ones. I think you got nominated for something for that, didn't you? Best
We
metal
did,
performance at the Grammys.
yeah, we did. We got nominated that year, and which was a really big surprise because historically the Grammys had only taken like classic or really recognizable names. They weren't really promoting any of these younger bands, and we were really pretty blown away that we got nominated. In terms of the actual winner that year, this is actually kind of a funny side story. Slayer had released like a B side, and this is just sort of like the way that the Grammy committees were at that time, and hopefully they've progressed over time. But you have all these people that don't necessarily listen to this genre of music. They're the ones voting on who gets to win, and they just didn't recognize anybody's name in the name pool except for Slayer. They're like, oh, well, we're just going to give Slayer the award. And then there was a lot of blowback because it was like not even, it wasn't even like it was like a re-recorded B-side or something, you know what I mean? And so even Slayer admitted it wasn't a very good song of theirs, you know what I mean? So it's just kind of a funny thing. But to just be in the industry, to be recognized as a developing band, and looking back to see the genre as a whole, to the influence we've had on the genre, it's just a really good feeling.
Yeah, and insult to injury, Slayer had just won the previous year, so they were probably like, we recognize that name. Let's give it to him again.
Yeah, yeah, and that's like the funny story. And I think at this point, even the Grammys have sort of accepted when it comes to the metal genre. They you know, if you historically look back at like, you know, what was the most influential record of that year and what actually won, you know, they have a bad track record of choosing the wrong choices, you know, because history, you know, we can always look back and it's a lot clearer, you know, years later. But um, I think it's the fact that they're trying at this point, you know, and I don't want to sit there and criticize because I do know that anytime an organization like that makes mistakes, they always try to figure out how to correct it in later years.
Well, that's true. That's true of everything. I opened this thing quoting all those 1980 movies from your birth year, and yeah, Ordinary People's great. Rest in peace, Donald Sutherland. Great movie, Robert Redford. But I mean, Raging Bull. Come on. Or, but you know, the winner is still good. It's just sometimes in hindsight, you're like, damn, we should have given it to Scorsese or As I Lay Dying in this case. um, how about The Powerless Rise? So now you're like, you know, globally famous post Grammys, post Nothing Left, post Ocean Between Us. Now there's no oceans between you. Powerless Rise. What was it? Pressure to follow up on that success because you did. I mean, it was all in the charts, baby.
Yeah, and that was an interesting time for the band because we had a choice, you know, to sort of follow some of the trends of our peers had really seen the genre grow and they had taken it maybe toward, you know, a more melodic direction, just try to see if they could get some radio crossover and things like that. And what I mean by that is I mean like, you know, like the top 10, you know, like almost like pop chart styles of radio and instead of like metal radio. And we kind of buckled down and said, you know, we're actually going to make our heaviest record yet, because you know, I personally didn't ever think that this genre of music would be able to make a living. When I first started, I just wanted to do it because I loved it. I was just passionate about it, you know. And so the idea that we were making a living, touring the country, touring the world, actually at that point, you know, playing a lot of sold out shows was like, hey man, like I personally am very happy with what we're doing. I just want to do this, make a record that we love, regardless of what the current trends are. And it was cool to say that we released our heaviest record at the time, and still made the top 10 charts. So that was a really good feeling.
Absolutely. And then so the last one before the band's sort of brief hiatus was Awakened. Any memories looking back on that? Was it sort of I mean, you didn't know you were going to take a break at that point, but was it a good one to kind of leave off on at that point?
Yeah, I think that that album was one of those ones where you know, making the record was like we pulled in a different producer outside of our genre, and we figured, you know, um we try some things that you know, just to see if we could shake it up. And then at the time it felt like um you know, we were sort of like at this place where we had created a lot of these records, and we weren't really sure like what was next. Like, let's just say regardless of the hiatus, like we weren't really sure what to explore creatively after that record. And so we released the record, we toured on it, but there wasn't like a lot of talks within the band about like, you know, excitement to make a new record after that, right? And so then the hiatus naturally put us into a place where we were really really excited to make new music when we came back. But when Awaken came out, I think we just kind of hit our stride, and we were just kind of cruising. And I think the record is, when you listen to like production quality and the recording quality and everything about that, I think for that year it's like we had finally figured out how to make our sound and make it not only um, consistent across like, you know, the diversity of 10 or 12 songs, but the mix on that album was fantastic, and the producer did a great job. And I just think everything was really really well oiled, and so we weren't really sure what to do next because we felt like we'd kind of figured out our formula at that point.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then, as we mentioned, there's a hiatus before Shaped by Fire in 2019 of like 7 years. And the hiatus, people can look it up. I'm not going to make you go into it unless there's anything you want to say during. You've went through some legal stuff and paid your debt to society, and so it's up to you if you want to talk about it. But I won't make you talk about it if you don't want. We can
Yeah,
just.
no, I mean, I never avoid it. You know, I understand that it's part of my history, and I think that most importantly, I think that I've been shown by our fan base and a large portion of society that there are people willing to see that, you know, people like myself that are not defined by one single action or one single choice or one single conversation. You know, and so I'm very grateful. I can't talk about that transitionary period of my life without expressing the gratitude that I'm having the opportunity to play music again, because it's not something I was certain I would have, and it had to be given to me. It's not something I came out and I didn't demand like, hey, I deserve to play music again. In fact, I actually planned my life thinking I might not ever be able to do this. And that, the fact that there's some people able to see, they're able to see that somebody could go down a dark path, make a terrible decision, but that doesn't have to solely define the entirety of their life. I think is something I'll always be grateful for.
Thanks for answering that question. You could have just hung up on me and said, F this dude.
No, it's part of our history. It's part of my history, at least.
Absolutely. Well, it's all about second chances and what you do with the rest of your life, right? So you come back with Shaped by Fire. Obviously, it's a comeback album for you, but for the band itself, I guess had they been doing like other projects while you were in jail, and then you got the band back together, and let's show them what they were missing, kind of a vibe.
Yeah, it was really good timing, creatively, because while I was gone, Phil and the rest of the guys had tried to pursue their band Woven War, and then Phil had actually lost interest and had left that band because he just he said he enjoyed making the two albums they did. He was happy, he's proud of them, but he just had lost interest. And coincidentally, it was the time that I wanted to start making music again. And I said, when I talked to him first, I said, hey, if this doesn't work out to be under the As I Lay Dying name, I just want to be able to start making music again. But of course, whatever I create is naturally going to sound like As I Lay Dying, even if I tried to not make it sound that way. So I would prefer put together a new As I Lay Dying record. And to my shock, Phil was actually, really open to the idea once we sat down and actually got to know each other again. It was almost like that, reintroducing ourselves and sort of like, there's not a completely a clean slate, but it's like, we haven't seen somebody in 6 years, you know what I mean? You really got to get to know them again. Anyway, so for me, the most important conversation that happened there was between Phil and I, because the core songwriters, it's like, well, I would love to make a record, but I'm not going to make a record unless there's, a songwriter to join me on this. And so, that was like the rebuilding phase. And we were both really passionate about being able to write new music again.
Absolutely. Had you spent the time you were literally, behind bars writing songs, you know what I mean? Like, had you been crafting ideas? Did a lot of that album come from that? Or was it more once you got out, then you all got together and put your heads together and came up with that stuff?
Well, to give proper credit, our previous bass player, Josh Gilbert, he also contributed creatively quite a bit to Shaped by Fire. So yeah, I would say that the trio of ideas was, in terms of, I mean, not performing the albums live or putting on the bells and whistles and like the finishing touches of making an album. I'm talking about just like the core demos, that became those songs. Those came from Phil, Josh, and I. And Phil and Josh hadn't written a metal record, in 6 years, and so they came with so many ideas at that time, that I primarily actually wanted to bring. I wanted to focus like on vocals and lyrics. And then I had such an overflow of the ideas that I had written behind bars, just playing. I got access to an acoustic guitar at one point and just had written. So that's why I had this outflow of material for my other side project. I had done a Born Through Fire record with a lot of guitar riffs that I had written there. And then, of course, Austrian Death Machine eventually came out. And so I had all these ideas that were all stockpiled up, but I really wanted Shaped by Fire specifically to showcase some of the ideas that Phil and Josh had stockpiled over the years.
Awesome. Well, we can't wait to see the next album, like you're saying, that's going to be coming out later this year. Turn out to Silver Spring to hear Burden off of that album. And you mentioned your side projects. I guess I should ask, if we come to your show, is it all As I Lay Dying, or do you ever mix in Arnold Schwarzenegger tribute band, Austrian Death Machine? Do you mix in any Christian metal from Point of Recognition? Like, do those ever make appearances in these shows?
It doesn't. There's no crossover. I've had people in the audience holding up signs, saying "Get to the chopper" or something like that. You know what I mean? And I appreciate that. But in terms of, the creative process for me, really the defining line of what makes As I Lay Dying is the collaborative experience. So if it's songs that I've written solo, it doesn't feel. I guess the early As I Lay Dying stuff naturally is stuff that I had written solo, but in terms of once Phil had joined the band, it's like this is the era of collaboration, and so we focus entirely on that. And I eventually need to get out and do more Austrian Death Machine tours, because I did one in Europe a few months ago, and it actually surprised myself and the promoters with how well it did. It was a really fun experience, so I need to get back out there.
Oh yeah, Europe. Especially Austria. I'm sure it's huge. Have
Yeah, they view that as like a hometown show. When we played in Vienna, Austria, it was the band. Obviously, I'm from San Diego,
yeah.
but in terms of the pride taken in that project, it's like I get like a second hometown show.
I love it. I love it. Has Arnold, I guess final seconds, has Arnold ever heard you guys, reached out to you guys, say great job or why are you roasting me or anything funny like that?
I've only heard rumors, so I can't confirm. And he's never like, you know, I have never like received an email or anything like that. So I'm just gonna say officially no, but I'm fairly certain from from people that have told me that the project's on his radar and he understands that it's actually like paying tribute to him, even when I'm
Yeah.
poking fun, because it's like I poke fun at myself as well during that project.
Of course, of course. Well, right now it's As I Lie Dying, but it sounds like you're teasing a return. You'll be back.
Yes, of course.
Awesome. Well, hey, thank you so much for this wide-ranging interview and for being so candid and teasing the new stuff and going back to the old stuff. Like it's been great. So again, everybody, it's As I Lay Dying is gonna rock the Fillmore in Silver Spring, just right over the border of the nation's capital, there in Silver Spring, Maryland. It's gonna be July 26th, Friday, July 26th. So everybody, get your tickets. Thanks for doing this, man.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to Beyond the Fame with Jason Fraley. Our theme music is Scott Buckley's Clarion. Remember to give us a 5-star rating if you like what you hear. We'll see you next time.